Oh, hello. Today, I want to talk about victim decision making, but in the aftermath of a crime. This is important because victimization isn't just an event, it's a moment that actually sets off a chain reaction of decisions. And almost immediately, victims are forced into a decision they didn't always ask for. And the reality is that calling the police is not always for everyone. And it's not because victims don't care, it's not because they're lying. It's not because they're uncooperative, but because in the aftermath, a lot of victims are not choosing between option A, which would be safety and justice, and option B, doing nothing. They're choosing between option A, one kind of harm, and option B, another kind of harm. And that is a very different decision. So, for example, imagine that you were just assaulted by your partner who strangled you until you blacked out. When you come to, you are thinking, this is insane. I'm so confused. I'm embarrassed, furious. I'm numb. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. How could someone I love do this to me? And then you look at your options, and your options are not always clean. Sometimes it's messy. Maybe this happened at a party where people were using illegal drugs. Maybe the perpetrator is on parole and calling the police is going to send them back to prison. Or maybe you are undocumented. So calling the police is not always going to be an option for everyone. And this first decision after a victimization usually isn't some dramatic movie moment where you grab the phone and you call 911. It's often smaller. Do I just pretend that this didn't happen? Who do I tell? Do I leave? Do I call my friend? Do I call my mom? Do I call the police? Do I do nothing because I literally can't deal with this today? And here's the key: victims respond in multiple ways. Police reporting is really only one option on a whole menu of options for help seeking. And when we're talking about help seeking, we're talking about two different types: informal and formal help seeking. Informal support usually comes first. One of the most consistent findings in the help seeking research is that victims often seek help through informal support services such as friends, family members, coworkers, roommates, neighbors. Formal support is when you involve people who have to document what happened, like the police, prosecutors, medical examiners, counselors, advocates, victim service agencies. And a lot of victims will turn to informal support services first. So if your gut reaction is, why didn't they just call the police? The research reaction is because many people don't. And the pattern is normal, predictable, and explainable. Also, sometimes your best first responder is just your friend who answers on the first ring. The decision to report is not always a yes or no. A lot of research explains reporting using a cost benefit framework. In the aftermath of a crime, victims generally weigh pros and cons of safety, protection, justice, preventing future harm, but the cons of reporting, such as retaliation, embarrassment, not being believed, and the time and emotional energy it takes to participate in the gauntlet of the criminal justice system. But here's the problem with thinking about this like a neat little math equation. Victims aren't calmly doing long division after trauma. Reporting is not only logic, it's emotion, it's fear, it's social pressure, it's making decisions in the face of uncertainty. It's the fact that your nervous system is basically screaming at you. So instead of imagining a victim with a spreadsheet, imagine a victim with no sleep, a pounding heart, a phone full of messages they cannot unread, and a brain trying to survive the next 5 minutes. Let's use an example. Let's say that a college student is sexually assaulted at a party. So the benefits of reporting might actually be this person gets held accountable and we're going to prevent future people from being sexually assaulted by this individual. However, this is a college environment. And so the costs might outweigh the benefits of reporting. So if they report, they might be blamed by friends or even the police officer. They may not be believed. It may create a lot of social situations since most perpetrators tend to be someone known. So it might be shared friend groups that create issues. And then also having to repeat the story to strangers. So it makes sense that they're going to go to a friend first. And the friends, they could be supportive, but they could also say, are you sure you want to ruin his life? And then suddenly the cost side of the equation explodes. That's not irrational. That's a pattern recognition. And that's someone realizing, oh, this may not go the way that I want it to. Another theory we use is focal concerns. And this describes how victims triage what happens next. Now, focal concerns was actually developed to better understand decision making among criminal justice professionals. But it also helps explain victim decision making because after victimization, victims are basically doing triage. They're asking, how blameworthy is this person? Meaning, was this intentional, dangerous? Is this behavior escalating? How much danger am I in right now? Meaning, will this happen again? Will they hurt me or someone else? And then third, what are the practical consequences of getting the system involved? Meaning, what is this going to cost me both emotionally and financially? And how can I survive this? So for many victims, the decision isn't, do I want justice? It's, can I survive the consequences of trying to get justice? And this creates a lesser of two evil problems, also known as decision inertia. Sometimes victims just get stuck, not because they're lazy, not because they're lying, not because they don't care, because every option feels dangerous. And that is decision inertia. Decision inertia is when someone is forced to choose between two bad options. The safest choice becomes delay, avoiding, and disengaging. So imagine you're being stalked and it's escalating. They're now showing up to your house, they're pounding on your door, and you call the police because you want one thing. You want this unwanted behavior to stop. So the police respond, the suspect is arrested, and prosecutors file charges. So in theory, this feels like a win, but then something changes. The suspect actually stops contacting you. The stalking pauses and your life gets calmer. And so now you're stuck. Option one is, just to walk away, disengage, and keep the peace. The behavior stopped, at least for now. The second option is keep cooperating with the prosecution, but that could also trigger retaliation and drag out stress for months and also create long-term fallout, especially if you share children or rely on the suspect for rent. Cooperating with the system could mean, not being able to pay rent, housing instability, more conflict, your kids being caught in the middle. So victims freeze and you delay, you disengage from the victim witness coordinator, you don't respond to the officer's phone calls. And it's not because you don't care, but because prosecution starts to feel like a risky gamble when you're thinking, I just want it to stop, but not at all costs. And that freeze response is that decision inertia. So reporting isn't one decision, it's a series of decisions. So now let's add just one more layer. Even when the victim reporting is not a one and done decision. It turns into this chain of decisions like, do I cooperate? Do I give a statement? What do I say in the statement? Do I hand over my phone? How many times do I have to go to court? Do I need to file for a protection order? What's that going to take? Do I keep answering calls when I'm exhausted? So a victim might report in the moment of crisis and then disengage later. It is not uncommon that the victim that we are dealing with on scene is a completely different person when we are working with during the follow-up. But when victims disengage or they don't want to file charges or participate in the system often reads this as, well, she's lying, she's unreliable, he keeps changing his story. But another explanation is just much more realistic. They are still living inside the consequences of reporting. They're still trying to keep the lights on. They are still trying to parent. They're still trying to manage their trauma. They're still weighing retaliation risk. And they may realize that full cooperation costs more than they can afford. And that isn't bad victim behavior, that's survival math. And sometimes the unwanted behaviors just stop. The victims do not perceive the system as a need in addressing their issue. And at that point, sometimes it can almost become a burden. And so victims may disengage or not want to participate at all. The takeaway is that calling the police is not always a universal decision because victimization is not a universal experience. Victims do not all have the same resources. They do not all have the same access to safety. They do not have the same freedom to leave. They do not have the same support system. So if we want more reporting and more cooperation, the answer is to not blame, but to understand who, what, when, where, and why of participation. The answer is reducing the costs of help seeking, making reporting safer, making participation less punishing, and recognizing that trauma shapes decision making. Because we need to stop acting shocked when someone who has been harmed is not immediately ready to hand their life over to a system that may or may not protect them. The system cannot guarantee the safety of victims. So the big idea is this: after victimization, victims aren't just reacting, they are deciding. They may tell someone informally. They may seek formal help by getting a protection order or calling the police. And every option comes with trade offs. Once you understand that, you stop asking, why didn't they call the police? And you start asking the question that actually improves practice. What would make reporting safer, more realistic, and more survivable for victims?